Hello and welcome, and a very special welcome to our guest, Julia Coney. Julia Coney is a Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas-based wine writer, wine educator, speaker, and consultant. Her wine writing includes stories on wine, winemakers, and the intersection of race, wine, and language. She has advocated for diversity and inclusion in the wine industry, and her 2018 open letter is largely regarded as an impetus for recognizing and confronting racism in the wine industry and seeking to include wine professionals who are Black. She is the founder of Black Wine Professionals, a database tool intended to increase diversity in the industry, the 2020 Social Visionary of the Year awardee, and Wine Enthusiast 2020 Wine Star Award recipient. Julia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is our pleasure, and thank you for agreeing to be a part of Black History Month at Penn State Berks as we recognize and celebrate Black excellence. So my first question would be, share with us a little bit about your professional experience, your personal and professional experiences, your background. What led you to wine?
I would like to say it was a lot of things that led me to wine. First was discovering, really understanding wine and food pairings in my late 20s in Houston as a legal assistant. The attorney I worked with he had just gone to Napa. He'd come back and all his boxes were in front of my desk. And I went, I can't get around, put your wine somewhere else. And he was like, didn't you study abroad in France? And I was like, yes, wine is cheaper to drink than soda. And he said, I'm going to have a barbecue at my house. And he paired beautiful Napa Valley Cabernets. Also, he had Napa Valley Chardonnay at that time. And this is like 98, 99. So this is a while back. And when he sat me down and said, what are you smelling? What are you tasting? And he just paired it with Texas barbecue. It wasn't like, as we say, a fancy meal. But to me, I really understood when I tasted the wine and tasted the food, why wine and food goes together. And it was a paradigm shift, honestly, for wine for me. But I didn't think about wine as a career because I was very happy in my job. And eventually I left law firms in Houston and came to law firms in DC. And then in DC, I just started a beauty blog back in 2006. But the thing about the beauty that interests me was basically the chemical makeup of products and also the fragrance and flowers of in higher end luxury fragrance. To me, there's something about it. And after studying fragrance and flowers in Grasse, France, where the flowers are grown, it was a connection of just a lot of things happening for me. And then eventually I decided after 10 years of writing about beauty, I didn't want to write about it anymore. Even after quitting my law firm job and going freelance, I was like, I want to do food and wine. I didn't know which one. And then one day it hit me that I really wanted to be a wine writer and I wanted to write wine and stories like Dorothy Gator and her husband, John Brescher, who did the tastings column for 12 years in the Wall Street Journal. And I saw this Black woman, right? I was like, oh, she's writing about wine and I get her. And it wasn't, and then when I started moving into this industry, and it wasn't until 2000, really 16, 17, that I really started noticing the industry was very racist. Like it was a privilege that they just didn't think about any other race in regards to like their tasting rooms, the culture of their tasting rooms, their stories. They just didn't have what I knew to be an image of a different wine person, a different wine consumer, and a different wine professional.
And so to that point, wine consumption and certainly, wine pairing, the experience of wine, it's pretty personal. It's a deeply personal experience. And as you began to just enter into this world of wine, you crossed over somewhere. I'm not going to call you an activist, but somewhere you began to just awaken to this notion of Blackness and the need for Black representation. Was there one particular incident? What happened to move you from this almost personal spiritual experience to activism, quote unquote?
Well, I started noticing it really in like the summer of 2016 when I was really moving into wine spaces. They have these industry tastings where everybody tastes together, and I could see I was being the only Black person there. Or I was getting comments like, "Oh, I thought only Black people only like sweet wine." And those things kept building. And the summit of what made me think about this was being in DC at a tasting, and a gentleman walks up to me. He taps me on the shoulder and asks me where the restroom was. And I said, "How would I know?" And he said, "Well, you look like the help." He didn't, he's never apologized. And he still works in the wine industry in DC. And I remember the PR lady just being so upset, like she was visibly upset because how could he say that? And he was like, "Well, she just does." And I was the only person in this beautiful tasting of Italian wines. I was the only Black person. I was the only person that really, like, you notice, like, oh, I'm the only one. And it was like 30 people, and it was a 3-hour wine lunch, and I'm the only person. And that's when I started realizing all the things that have happened before led to that moment. And I was very frustrated. That was in November of 2017. And then when I saw the article in Some Journal, and Karen McNeil mentioned the wine glass ceiling and all the faces, there was no Black person. There was no, and I was just like, I'm just fed up. And it took me a few days to write that response because so many people tagged me. So many of my friends work in the business, and they were just like, "Oh, you're gonna love this." And I said, "I don't see myself in this story." And when I wrote my response, I actually wrote it, and I said, "Okay, it's off my chest. I've said what I needed to say." And then when the next day I woke up and it kind of exploded in the wine industry because no one had ever really said anything, that's when I knew this was bigger than just this open letter. This means they know it's a problem. People see it's a problem, but no one has said anything. That's when I knew it was a changing of my life, not because I thought I was going to be this activist. I don't think activism comes that way. I think it just comes naturally. It was more of, okay, somebody is reading this and they know we need to be heard, and they haven't been hearing us. That's how all that started.
And as I listen to you and you share your pre 2018 subtle awareness that there are few in the room that look like you, and you come to 2018, you confront this article. Would you say that that is the moment that you went public with your feelings? And do you agree with the sentiment that says it was your 2018 open letter that really brought this issue of racism in the wine industry to the floor, to the
Yes.
floor?
Yes, I had never seen anything so publicly about it, about racism in the wine industry. And at that point, when I hit send on that blog post, I went, "I have nothing to lose. I am just so frustrated. And if I don't say anything," and at that time, my mother was living, and she said, "Are you making it better for someone coming after you? Because if you are going to make it better, or you don't want to say anything, then let it go. But if you have to say something in your heart, you can't let this injustice go." And I had to be okay with that because I didn't see myself as an advocate or an activist. I just saw myself as a wine journalist not getting a fair shake. That's all I saw myself as.
And I reviewed your letter, and I also reviewed the commentary, some of the responses that you got. And I noticed that one of the persons who commented was Dorothy Gaither herself. So, how did you feel seeing another woman of color who you had revered in the wine industry? She had been a part of your gaining education and knowledge, your wine experience. How did it feel having her affirmation and saying, "Julia, well done. I'm glad you did this"?
I mean, when I saw her comment, I started crying, and then she reached out to me via email. She reached out and said, "What do you need? Like, how can I help? Because what you did was something that needed to be said, and it needed to be said at a time when social media and everything was really converging in a way that it has exploded now." And for me, I'm doing the right thing. It was the seal of approval that I didn't know I needed, but I received.
and as I'm chronicling it in my mind and just hearing your experience, from 2018, what comes to my mind, when you said everything coming together in social media, talk about the riveting experience that we had as we watched the killing of George Floyd. And that took the conversation of racism, in my view, from the subtle undercurrents to a sort of tidal wave to a sort of tsunami of confrontation. And it was right around that time that you established Black wine professionals. So I want to know, as you were contemplating, I need to do something for change, this horrible occurrence takes place. Talk about what it did to you and how it related to your development of the Black Wine Professionals database.
Well, I will say it took George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, the people to notice their deaths, right? And it took a pandemic, because had the pandemic not happened, I would have been traveling. I would not have been home like most people. And we know this happens, but it would have been on a like, okay, we know this happens. Black people protest and nothing changes, right? What happened, we were all home. So we were all watching the TV. We were all watching the news. And people who had listened to what I was saying finally was like, okay, I see what you've been saying, and they've seen what other people have been saying. So I, during that time when the Blackout Tuesday, to amplify Black voices, when I wasn't seeing a lot of wine community say anything because I don't know what to say, I don't want to say anything wrong. Wine, I'm not getting into that because that's politics, right? But wine is political. Food is political. A lot of things are political. And they weren't saying anything. So I kept going back, what can I do next? I've been writing and speaking about it. And that's when I decided I don't want a person in power, a gatekeeper, to ever say to me, they don't know many Black wine professionals. Because it was said to me over the years that, oh, I would have hired somebody, but I didn't know where to look. I would have hired somebody, but I didn't know a Black wine professional. Now you have no choice because I created a database for you to find them. Not someone necessarily entering the industry, but someone established where you can just take your pick and say, okay, let me add them to the pool. Because what I found, a lot of Black wine professionals weren't even getting access to the master classes I was given access to.
So what do you say to those who say the more you talk about diversity and inclusion is the more you end up actually disassociating or excluding some folks? When you attempt to include more Blacks and increase the participation of Black wine professionals in the wine industry, there are some who argue that that can serve to polarize and create silos and in itself create exclusion.
Well, I say to them, check your privilege, because for them to say that, that means there's a privilege somewhere that they're thinking everybody has not only a seat at the table, they've actually been invited to dine, right? So with that, I say check your privilege, but also know diversity is good for business. There's so many studies about the bottom line. At the end of the day, the color the wine industry and a lot of industries needs to understand is green. Green is the color that they're not focusing on by you saying we're excluding this person. I needed to focus because I am Black. I identify as Black. And what I was finding was Black people, people of color, it didn't matter, right? The wine industry was still telling them, "Oh, you're the Somm, you could be Asian American." It Oh, you're Latinx. Oh, you're the Somm. It's still, but for me, I knew in all that as a Black woman what I wasn't getting in the industry. So if I wasn't getting it in the industry, someone coming after me and someone currently by my side wasn't getting it as well. And so now they can't, for my people, I look now at these master classes. Before, it would be 30 people, I'll be the only Black person. Now 30 people, half the room are people of color. Not just Black, just people of color. So it has changed. It has changed the industry.
And just before I ask you to share a little bit more about the database itself and how it's used as a tool and who are the members, I listened to you talk about the experience of being there, and it draws me to an article from the Chicago Tribune last year where TJ spoke about being an owner of the wine industry and owning the urban grape, he and his wife. And he speaks of this invisibility that he says wine professionals who are Black experience in a predominantly white wine industry. Do you hear this from wine professionals, this invisibility, and help us understand what is this invisibility that TJ is talking about, and that I've heard and read in other articles advocating for Black participation in the wine industry?
Well, it could be something as I work part-time at a wine store in Washington, D.C. It could be someone coming in and asking for the person who knows the most about champagne. They'll tell them it's me, and they'll go, no, the real person who knows about champagne, because they can't believe it's a Black woman. Or in TJ's case, they can't believe he's the owner of this successful wine store because they've never met a Black person in wine, let alone this store owner. So the invisibility comes from people, even in classes, going, oh, I poured wine, but I just didn't see you there. It's things like it's this perception, because when I think of a Black wine professional, I don't think of you, because we don't think of Black wine professionals. Wine is a luxury product. Black people are not associated with luxury products unless they're there to entertain people. We think of luxury in terms of celebrity. We don't think of it in terms of the everyday person. So if I'm selling a luxury bottle of wine over $75, I can't be the person that knows about that wine because I don't associate you with luxury. So that's where the invisibility comes in.
And it takes some working through to garner the level of respect that you have now garnered in the wine industry. Well, as you talk about TJ in that way, the African American Association of Vintners have said in their last report that less than 1% of US wineries in the United States are owned by Blacks, less than 1%. What needs to change specifically as it relates to leadership and business ownership and garnering that leadership role in the wine industry?
Well, I think we have to showcase that wine is a viable career. Being in the wine industry is a career. We don't showcase that. And we also need to showcase it from the lens of many people of color, especially Black people in this country, see wine as laborious. It's a labor, right? There's farming involved. We need to disassociate it with not slavery, but ownership, understanding this kind of agriculture. Wine is an agricultural product, but when we think of agriculture, we only think of food. We never always don't think of wine, but wine is an agricultural product, and we need to highlight that to actually go in these companies recruiting at HBCUs, at predominantly white colleges, to the minorities that go there. That is a way to that's not happening. It's like we're recruiting at a college, but are you recruiting at all, even junior colleges, to teach people this skill in trade? Because you have a lot of winemakers who may have not gone to, because wine is chemistry. They may not have gone to school for it, but they've been in the business long enough. But it's more of a hand up and not a hand out. And we just need to understand there's a difference.
And so to that point, I do understand that you have educators as part of the database tool. So tell us about the database, and tell us specifically not only a little bit about the educators that are a part of your database, but on my side of the fence, what does wine education, what does hospitality education, what does higher ed in general need to do to begin to foster that change in the younger folks, the millennials that are coming up? That
Well,
may be wine.
I do think social media has played a great part in introducing more millennials to wine. I do think that. I think they use social in a tool to really understand and learn. The database is there for companies or part of like different wineries to hire people. So we not only have educators, but we have a list of podcasters. We have a list of writers for media, because media are the ones we get the word out, right? That's what we do. We like to get the word out. But I also have sales reps. Maybe a company is hiring for sales. There's a list that you can find people of who are Black on this list that work in the wine business, because also we need sales. There's distributors. I call them the grape whisperers. They're the people who actually grow the grapes. They're the people in the field. They're the people who cultivate the vine. That is also a career that we need to really think about, because viticulture and that agriculture part I was saying, that's part of wine. That's how we get the grapes, right? We can't have wine without farming. And so when companies think of recruiting, they need to take a look at who is on your recruiting team.
Mhm.
Even if you have to hire people outside of your recruiting team, maybe somebody for contract work, to actually go to many of these HBCUs if it's not presented to you. Because think about most people of color and most Black people, we don't grow up with wine on the table. I didn't grow up with wine as a table. On the table, my family doesn't drink. But if we have people to introduce people in college or in business school on all parts of the wine industry that work at these major companies, you know, all the bigger distribution, when they start recruiting, they just need to recruit from a different source. You can keep the same source, but maybe add two or three more HBCUs. Also, add community colleges. A lot of times in recruiting, we forget people who are still in college in a different way. That is another way you can find candidates that you might not have thought about finding before.
So as you mentioned that, so the database, is it open to anyone? What's the selection process? How does one become a member or participant in the database?
Well, right now I'm currently going through over 200 applicants. So we will reopen it March 1st. People have to apply. Now, the one thing, the database is for people with minimum 3 to 4 years of experience in the wine industry. So it's not for people who are entering the industry, it is people who are already established. So I'm working on maybe something for people who are trying to enter the industry, but I'm still trying to flesh it out. But the current database is for people who are in the industry currently. So if you need a virtual tasting, we can match you up with a person that's best for that skill set. If you want to focus on Italy, I have an Italy person. If you want to do all rosé, I have a rosé person. He's an expert on rosé. That way people come and he gets hired, because it's not just I want to give you free wine. How do we also give them income? How do we also help them get a wage? That is what the database is for.
Okay. Okay. That's quite a number of applications. So March 1st is the date that you're going. So a two-part question. As I listened to the bit about leadership, I recall last year the Court of Master Sommeliers had scandal enough. There were alleged, experiences of sexual harassment, sexism, ageism, racism, and the board itself underwent a certain amount of purge. But what they have found is that there were no persons of color, so to speak, who were willing to throw their hat in the ring. And as they purged the board and were in the process of creating new leadership, they still found an issue with people of color not wanting to participate. What does change look like for Julia Coney? 5 years from now, what does diversity and inclusion in action in the wine industry look like?
For me, I will say this first about the quartermaster sommeliers. I do a different track, so I'm not part of the CMS. But I do believe sometimes things need to implode in order to come back together. I know they are working on initiatives. They're working to bring more people of color and Black people. And we also have to remember, for board seats, people have to have the time, right? And I always say it's a marathon and not a sprint. But I will say they have initiatives coming, and I want people to have a little more patience for what is actually coming, because they are making great change. For me, what I think in the next 5 years is I want to see more people of color on board seats across all the organizations. I want to see more people of color on board seats at the major universities that deal with hospitality, that deal with winemaking and viticulture. There need to be more of us on those boards, and those boards need to also realize people have to buy board seats in certain organizations. We need to figure out how do we get people to get on these board seats that are actually you have enough funds to pay for them to be on the board seat. If a board seat is $5,000, I don't have the, I'm a freelance writer. I can't pay $5,000 to be on a board seat, but someone can sponsor me from a corporation to be on that board seat. It just makes a bigger difference. It's looking at it like, what are you getting by having another voice on this board? You're getting diversity, one, but you're getting a new voice. And we all have to be okay with new voices and new energies to keep wine moving into the next millennia. That's what we have to do. So yeah.
New voices. So if my hospitality students are watching this video, Black History Month, recognizing Black excellence, and I say my hospitality students because I am biased, but to business students, what's the one thing that you want to say to these students who may be interested in the wine industry? What's your message for them for Black History Month?
My message for you is keep striving, keep doing excellent things. Just know the work is hard. The work is not done, but you can be in this industry. It might take learning something, reading something you're not used to, getting a little bit uncomfortable because there's the wine terminology and learning. But I will say it is a great industry. I love being a part, no matter what happens in all that I do. I know that the next generation coming after me, everything I do is in service to them. Everything I do is in service. It's in service to the people right now, and it's for the generation coming after me. I don't want the generation coming after me to go through anything I'm going through. I'm doing the work. I want them to walk in ease. I want them to walk in ease with this. I don't want to make it harder or say, like, I did it. You need to follow after me and you need to grind. I don't want you to grind like me. I want it to be way easier for you than me.
Wonderful. Julia, it has been a pleasure talking with you, but I'm not going to let you go without asking you one question. With all those bottles behind you and glasses. So
Yes.
what's go-to flavor? What's the note of preference? What's Julia's favorite glass?
My favorite glass usually has a sparkling wine in it. It depends on the mood, but the majority of the time it is a Chardonnay based sparkling wine. It is a Blanc de Blanc. That is pretty one of my top favorite. I just love the way the acid goes. I love that it's food friendly. It's an aperitivo type of wine. I can just drink it on its own. I can have it with a great meal, but I am a sparkling person. I love sparkling wine. I believe bubbles bring the party. That is my little thing. I think everybody, when you hear a bottle of bubbles pop, you just smile. And so for me, sparkling wine is my jam.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Julia, it has been such a pleasure talking with you, learning about Black wine professionals and the work that you are doing. We certainly wish you all the very best. We look forward to talking with you again, and thank you for being a part of Black History Month at Penn State Berks as we recognize and celebrate Black excellence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I will say this, when the world opens up, I want to come and meet your students.
I will work on that. You have a
I
day.
want to come meet your students. I want to see them
Awesome.
in person, and I want to help as much as I possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to
Thank
make
you.
it happen. Thank you, Julia Coney.
Thank you.